Hi everyone, this is Neel Raithatha, also known as the Wax Whisperer. Thank you for joining me in my latest video. We have here a patient who attended a very deep, impacted, wet, almost soupy earwax. The adjective soupy was on the patient themselves actually after watching the video back. That's how they described it. And the reason why this wax is really wet and soupy is that the patient has been using hydrogen peroxide drops for quite a while in an attempt to remove the wax. And I also, memory serves me correct, they did poke in their ears. And what happens with hydrogen peroxide drops, that is when you insert hydrogen peroxide drops into the ear, it reacts with an enzyme that's secreted by one of the glands in the ear, the ceremonous glands called perinase, if I'm correct. And that then causes the hydrogen peroxide drops to release oxygen, and you get a bubbling formation of oxygen, effervescence it's called, and this foaming bubbling of oxygen within the ear, that mechanical bubbling is believed to help break up the wax. So wax is made up on average about 60% of dead skin cells, so exfoliated skin cells in the ear, and that forms the matrix of the earwax. So think about earwax. In the core, you've got this matrix of dead skin cells and hair strands, and that forms almost like a structure, like a scaffolding, if you like. And then around that, you get these oils and sweats, and collectively, that's earwax. So the effervescence of oxygen through the reaction of hydrogen peroxide drops with perinase, so it's a catalase reaction, that's what it's called. It helps to break up the skin cells. In addition, hydrogen peroxide drops often comes in a water solution, and water gets absorbed by the dead skin cells, and the skin cells then overhydrate. They basically swell up and the membranes break. So, contrary to belief, hydrogen peroxide drops, and no other drops really, not hydrogen peroxides, but no drops out there actually dissolves earwax. So my definition of dissolving earwax, and it could just be that I'm quite literal in my definition, is that the wax disappears, it dissolves, it goes away. So hydrogen peroxide doesn't do that, but it does break up the wax. But it can make it really mushy and wet, and that, as explained, that's because the skin cells become overhydrated, they become macerated, they swell and they expand and they burst the membranes, the skin cell membranes, and you get this effect. And of course, when you poke in the ear, you're going to push it right up against the eardrum. So we're working in this anterior recess region. This is the most difficult part of the ear to operate in. So as the ear canal channels towards the eardrum, it narrows about 0.5 centimetre away from the eardrum, and then the ear canal widens thereafter. And that creates a recess here where I am now. This is an inferior, that's called the inferior recess. It's like a trench, a basin, and also an anterior recess. So the anterior recess, in the case of the left ear, is to the left-hand side. You can see there's a little bit of wax there. Truth be told, I don't think it would have caused the patient too many symptoms, but I'm going to see if I can just get some of this out from there. It is very difficult because we're not only close to the eardrum, but we're very close to the anterior canal wall, and that's very sensitive. And you'll see in a minute, you'll be surprised how much comes away. Even I was a bit surprised. It doesn't look like a lot, but because it's a little, there we are, you can see it's much more than I anticipated, but it's a hidden cave there, so sometimes that cave can be quite deep. There's a little bit of wax just around the edge there. I'm going to just quickly hover over, see what comes away. Sometimes you want to quick wash your head. We managed to get that out. I was really pleased with that. But we don't want to overdo it. And this section I'm fine with because the diameter of the suction probe, it can fit into the gap on the eardrum, but there's a bit left, a bit higher up. And if I attempt to go that, the right-hand side edge of the suction probe will probably make contact with the hammer bone. So The hammer bone, also known as the malleus, that's attached to the eardrum. That's the first of the 3 middle ear bones, the hammer bone. And the second bone, known as the anvil, or medically known as the incus, that's the bridge between the hammer bone and the stirrup. So the stirrup bone, also known as the stapes, that's the smallest bone in the body. So you've got 3 middle ear bones. Collectively, they're known as the ossicles, the hammer bone, the anvil, and the stirrup. Medically, they're known as the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And the stapes is attached to the organ of hearing called the cochlea. And the site where it attaches to the cochlea, we call that the oval window. So when sounds enter the ear and they travel through the ear canal, they vibrate against the eardrum, and these vibrations are transmitted through the 3 middle ear bones to the stapes bone. And when the stapes bone vibrates, it causes fluid within the organ of hearing, so the cochlea, to travel in waves. And the fluid that travels in waves themselves travel over little sensory hair cells, and we call them outer hair cells. There are also some inner hair cells in there. And when fluid travels over these hair cells sear to backwards and forwards. And this searing effect, so the sideways movement of these sensory hair cells, they also contract as well. And when they contract and when they sear side to side, they generate an electrical impulse. And this electrical impulse travels up to the brain via the auditory nerve, to the auditory cortex, where it is detected and processed as sound. So it's a very complicated and intricate system. And so there's many reasons why people develop hearing loss. In the case of the ear canal, where we're working here, it could be earwax or infection, so an obstruction of the ear canal in some way. You can have a problem with the middle ear. So, for example, you could have a hole in the eardrum called a perforation, which reduces the mobility of the eardrum, so less vibrations are transmitted in response to sounds through the eardrum, through the ossicles. You could have otosclerosis, and that's when the stapes bone, it typically affects the stapes bone, that becomes stiffened. You get some additional spongy bony growth. You could have ossicular disarticulation. That's when the 3 bones actually detach from each other, and so they just swing without really transferring any sounds and transmitting it through to the organ of hearing. Or you could have, so if there's a problem with the outer ear or the middle ear, we call that a conductive hearing loss. So the reason for your hearing loss is the sound is not getting conducted from the outer ear through to the inner ear. And then if you've got an inner ear problem, we call that a sensory neural loss, and typically that's due to wear and tear to the sensory hair cells and the auditory nerve. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video, guys. Take care, keep well.